Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into something really quite fascinating, a profession that, well, it shapes so much around us, but often flies under the radar.
Yeah, it's one of those things people sort of know exists, but maybe don't grasp the specifics of. We're talking about the Public Relations Council.
Exactly. And our mission today really is to unpack what that actually means.
Yeah.
Get past the vague ideas and look at how it works. And honestly, the surprising impact that has day to day.
It's interesting because certainly back when these ideas were forming, the field was so new, almost no precedent, very few set rules,
Right.
which, makes it tough even for the people doing the work to clearly define it. It kind of reminds me of what Judge Cardozo said about judges.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
While he observed that judges, even after performing their duties countless times, really struggle to explain the judicial process itself, ask them how they decide, and they often retreat into jargon.
Because it's hard to pin down something you do almost instinctively after a while.
Precisely. Deep experience often resists simple definition.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And this role, the PR council, it's really got two sides to it, doesn't it? It's not just about, say, telling the public about a client.
No, not at all. That's maybe half the picture.
Yeah.
Just as crucial is interpreting the public back to the client, understanding the public mind.
So it evolved
Yeah.
from just fixing problems after the fact
Right, like crisis management.
to actual being involved much earlier,
Yeah.
advising on what actions to take, what policies to set, making them a key advisor on actions, as the source puts it.
And essentially, yeah, a pleader to the public of a point of view, an advocate.
Okay, so let's ground this a bit. Let's talk about some real-world cases. This is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Definitely. So there's this classic example, a very famous high-end New York hotel. Business suddenly plummeted.
Why? What happened?
A false rumor started spreading that it was going to close down. Just totally untrue, but damaging.
Okay. So what do? Just issue a denial?
Well, the council involved realized that wouldn't really cut it. A mere denial, as they said, would accomplish little. Might even keep the rumor circulating.
Right. So what was the move?
It was pretty ingenious. They publicly announced that the hotel's very famous maître d'hôtel, the head waiter, basically a well-known figure, had just had his contract renewed.
Oh.
For 5 years. And they made sure to mention his salary, which was apparently something many bank presidents might envy.
Huh. So making a big splash about continuity and investment.
Exactly. It generated national news. Cancellations stopped almost immediately. The rumor just vanished because here was concrete, positive proof the hotel was thriving and planning for the long term.
That's smart. Using an existing asset, the maitre d', to create totally new, positive buzz. It's a different way of thinking about value.
It really is. Okay, another one. A national magazine. They wanted to boost their prestige, specifically among important advertisers.
So make themselves look more influential, more highbrow.
Sort of, yeah. The council looked at what they were already publishing and realized some really valuable editorial content was just going to waste, not being leveraged.
I like what?
There was an article by a prominent doctor arguing something quite counterintuitive at the time, that the real killer pace wasn't the fast, busy one, but the slow, dull routine.
Interesting.
So the strategy was to highlight that specific article. It got noticed, and then Herbert Hoover actually wrote a letter praising it. He even distributed it to some relief committees he was involved with.
Wow. So a presidential seal of approval almost.
Pretty much. It helped the humanitarian cause, sure, but crucially, it massively boosted the magazine's standing. And they didn't have to change their content, they just amplified what was already there.
Finding the hidden gem and polishing it. Okay, what else? These are great examples.
Well, there was a big packing house. They were already the main player in the bacon market, but they wanted to sell more bacon overall, not just steal market share, but grow the whole pie.
Tricky. How do you make people eat more bacon if they're already buying yours?
The council tapped into health ideas. They recognized the prevailing wisdom, or at least a plausible argument, was that hearty breakfasts were dietetically sound.
Okay.
So they suggested funding a physician's survey. Get a medical expert to articulate this idea that hearty breakfasts are good for you.
And then publicize that finding widely.
You got it. Spread that message. And, well, what's a key part of a hearty breakfast for many people?
Bacon.
Exactly. So promoting the idea of a hearty breakfast naturally increased the demand for bacon itself.
That one feels a bit more manipulative, perhaps.
Yeah.
Using health narratives for sales and definitely blurs some lines.
It does raise ethical questions, absolutely. It shows the power, though.
Yeah.
Another case, a hairnet company. They were facing disaster because bobbed hair became the big fashion.
Ah, the flapper era. Yeah, hairnets suddenly looked very old-fashioned.
Totally. Sales were plummeting.
Hmm.
So after some digging, the council advised focusing on the opinions of influential women, specifically club women who were seen as social leaders.
Okay, like the tastemakers of the time.
Right. They conducted a survey of these women and then publicized the findings, which, perhaps not surprisingly, leaned towards longer hair being more socially acceptable.
Ah, creating a counter-narrative.
Essentially, yes, it made long hair socially more acceptable than bobbed hair, which actually helped to modify the fashion trend, or at least slow the decline, and save the industry.
The range here is just amazing. Bacon, hairnets, hotels. It seems like these principles could be applied almost anywhere. What about bigger stages, like international relations?
Oh, definitely. There's a fascinating case from 1919 involving Lithuania. They wanted independence recognized by the U.S., but they faced huge indifference and, frankly, ignorance in America. Nobody knew much about Lithuania.
So how do you fix that?
The PR Council did an incredibly deep dive, an exhaustive study, the source calls it. History, culture, economics, politics, everything.
Building the foundational knowledge.
Yes, and then tailoring that information. Different messages for senators, for congressmen, for the general public. They organized mass meetings, got petitions going.
Building grassroots support or the appearance of it.
And making noise so that when the official Lithuanian Information Bureau went to the press, they weren't just some random group. They represented a nation that was suddenly figured largely in the American news.
They made themselves impossible to ignore.
Exactly. Turned them from an unknown entity into a topic of conversation. Someone actually dubbed it advertising a nation to freedom.
Wow. Advertising a nation. That's a powerful phrase. Did it work for others too?
There's the example of Romania. They initially tried a very academic approach, sending out these dense treatises, historically correct and ethnologically accurate, but
Nobody read them.
pretty much ignored. So the council's advice was, turn that dry information into interesting stories of news value.
Make it readable, make it engaging.
Yes, and suddenly the public read these stories with avidity. Romania became part of America's popular knowledge, not just an obscure name.
It's about storytelling then, fundamentally,
Right.
not just facts. And what about problems closer to home? Domestic issues.
Sure. Also in 1919, a different problem. Ex-servicemen coming back from the war were struggling to find jobs. There was a real risk of bitterness and social unrest.
A huge issue. How did PR help there?
The War Department ran a reemployment campaign with PR Council help. They didn't just make logical appeals, they targeted businessmen's emotions, their personal and local pride, their obligation of honor to rehire the people who'd worked for them before the war.
Appealing to duty and community standing.
And they created tangible symbols, official citations signed by cabinet secretaries for businesses that pledged to rehire. Influential groups like the Fifth Avenue Association in New York agreed to display these citations all at once on Bastille Day, July 14th.
A coordinated public display of commitment.
Exactly. It became a potent example, creating social pressure and a sense of shared effort that spread across the country.
So looking back at all these cases, the hotel, the bacon, Lithuania, the veterans, what's the core lesson here? How did they manage to influence perception so effectively?
I think the biggest takeaway isn't just about clever tactics. It's about a deep, almost intuitive grasp that public perception isn't really driven by pure logic.
It's more emotional, instinctive.
Very much so. They understood how to tap into existing beliefs, emotions, group identities, even those deep-seated human instincts. They weren't just, putting out fires. They were often subtly reshaping the landscape of public thought itself by working with those underlying currents.
And to really get how they did that, we need to understand what that public thought or public opinion actually is, or how they saw it anyway.
Exactly. Because the foundation of all this is how people form opinions. And, well, the source material is pretty blunt about it. Public opinion isn't typically some well-reasoned, logical conclusion.
No. What is it then?
It's often described as vague, little understood, indefinite, and importantly, mercurial and changeable. It's seen as this collection of individual judgments, but those judgments often aren't based on research and logical deduction.
So where do they come from?
Often they're just dogmatic expressions accepted on the authority of his parents, his teachers, his church, things we absorb without really questioning them.
It is striking, isn't it? How often people who know very little about something, little knowledge of a subject, still manage to form definite and positive judgments on it.
Absolutely. Think about historical beliefs like witches being real or the earth being flat, or even today, people having incredibly strong views on complex topics like, say, spiritualism without having done any real investigation.
And that certainty often leads to, well, not being very open to other views.
Exactly. Intolerance. You see it in bitter quarrels on theories of pacificism or militarism, or even in political debates where sometimes personal attack supersedes logic. People dig their heels in.
So why? Why are we like this? Is there a deeper reason we cling to these unexamined beliefs?
Well, one really influential idea comes from William Trotter. He talked about the herd instinct as this fundamental biological force shaping human behavior.
Herd instinct, like wanting to belong to the group.
That's a huge part of it. Trotter pointed out a few key things. First, humans are generally intolerant and fearful of solitude, both physically and mentally.
Right.
We crave connection, that sense of spiritual identification with the herd. We want to be on the bandwagon, as he put it.
That feeling of safety in numbers or safety in shared belief.
Precisely. Second, we're incredibly sensitive to the voice of the herd. That voice becomes the source of his moral codes. It's powerful. It can give us energy and courage or take them away. It can even, and this is quite a statement, make people accept as truth the explanation that their perfectly preventable afflictions are sublimely just and gentle. Basically accepting the group narrative even when it hurts them.
That is, yeah, that's quite unsettling. What else did Trotter note?
Third, a susceptibility to leadership. Often, he observed, leadership of a quality that really cannot stand analysis if you look closely. We follow quite readily. And finally, this tendency we have to rationalize our instinctive behavior. We like to think our actions are based on pure reason, but often they're not.
Give me an example of that.
Well, think about voting. We might tell ourselves we chose a party after carefully weighing all the issues. But Trotter suggests it's just as likely we voted that way because we always have, or maybe because our annoying neighbor supports the other party.
Huh. Okay, I can see that.
Or laughing at the customs of another culture, calling them irrational, while totally ignoring our own habits that might be just as illogical if viewed from the outside.
Right. And building on this idea of mental shortcuts, Walter Lippmann brought in the concept of stereotypes.
Yes, exactly. Lippmann saw stereotypes as these preformed pictures in our heads. Mental templates that largely determine what group of facts we shall see and in what light we shall see them.
So our stereotypes filter reality for us.
In a big way. It explains why, say, a capitalist and a socialist looking at the same economic situation will see entirely different things and focus on different facts. And each thinks the other is being unreasonable.
Because their mental stereotypes are framing it differently.
Precisely. Now, these stereotypes can be deliberately created and promoted. Think of Theodore Roosevelt's square deal or big stick. Catchphrases that create a mental image.
Okay.
But they can also wear out, become shop-worn, like maybe 100% American did over time, and it's not just words. Visible things act as stereotypes, too. A flag triggers patriotism. A scientist in a lab coat with test tubes. Well, that fits our stereotype of a chemist.
So you almost need the prop to fit the image.
Sometimes, yes. But Lippmann also warned about the danger here. Demagogues can use these stereotypes, substituting powerful words for acts, manipulating public perception without actually doing anything substantial.
It's a complicated picture then. Are we just puppets of these stereotypes and instincts, or do things like the media shape us?
It's definitely a two-way street. You might think newspapers, for instance, just dictate public opinion, but often, the source argues, the agreement and point of view is the result of the control exercised by the public mind over these institutions. Newspapers reflect their readers' views as much as shape them.
So the public influences the media too.
Yes, but of course, external forces, parents, schools, advertising, leaders, they still exert a huge influence on that public mind. It's a constant interplay.
And within that interplay, how does something become news? What gets picked up by, say, a newspaper?
Well, fundamentally, news is fresh information of something that has lately taken place. But the key ingredient is that it has to be a departure from the established order, something unusual, unexpected.
The man bites dog idea.
Exactly. The source gives a couple of stark examples. Madame Caillo's acquittal in Paris, a huge trial happened the same day Austria declared war on Serbia, starting World War I. Guess which story dominated?
The war, obviously, overshadowed everything.
Completely. What else happened that day became the question. Or another rather grim example. A boiler explosion killed 3 workers referred to with the terribly offensive term in the original text, by the way, and it got maybe 10 lines in the paper.
Minimal coverage.
But a baby carriage found unharmed 50 feet away from the blast, that got a half column because it was the freak of explosive chemistry, the unusual detail that caught the editor's eye.
So it's about grabbing attention, fitting what the editor thinks readers want in their limited time.
Precisely. Editors select what they believe will absorb the half hour's attention a certain set of readers will give to his newspaper. It's about perceived reader interest and the unusual.
Which means, for the Public Relations Council, it's not enough just to have information.
Right. You can't just supply facts. You often need to create news, frame your information, or stage an event in a way that fits what the press considers a newsworthy departure from the norm.
And another layer here, society isn't just split into big opposing camps like capital versus labor, is it?
No, that's far too simple. The reality is individuals belong to many different groups at the same time. These interlapping group formations, as the text calls them.
How so?
Think about one person. They might be a factory worker, but also own a few shares of stock, making them a small capitalist. And they might belong to a specific church and a bowling league and maybe an ethnic association.
Right. Multiple identities, multiple loyalties.
Exactly. This variety, the inconsistency of the average man's mental, social, and psychological commitments is actually crucial. It allows for gradual change in society because people aren't locked into a single viewpoint. It fosters a certain receptivity and open-mindedness, potentially.
Because you can appeal to different parts of their identity.
Precisely. And this complex landscape, combined with changed external conditions, creates opportunities. Think about when radio first appeared, or when economic shifts made thrift more important, or how the automobile completely changed daily life. These shifts open doors to influence viewpoints.
By tapping into those fundamental instincts we talked about.
Yes, exactly. Appeals are often made to basic human drives. Take pugnacity, that inherent love of a struggle, of suspense, of seeing a fight and picking a side.
How is that used?
By staging battles against evils. Think of public health campaigns like New York City's fight against tuberculosis or Swat the Fly campaigns. They frame the issue as a conflict. Even debates, contests, or a charity boxing match tap into this desire to see a contest.
Okay, turning it into a fight makes people engage. What else?
The instinct for play. Things like street fairs, fireworks displays, community celebrations, they leverage our desire for fun and spectacle.
Makes sense.
And then there are more direct appeals. The desire for shelter used in an ad for, say, American radiator heating systems, or appealing to the gustatory sense, our sense of taste, like Gulden's mustard did. And of course, straightforward sex appeal, famously used in campaigns like Woodbury soap with the tagline, "The skin you love to touch."
So really understanding these deep human drives and the complex web of groups people belong to, that's the toolkit for anyone trying to navigate or shape public opinion. It's less about overt manipulation, perhaps, and more about understanding the levers that actually move people.
That seems to be the core idea. And translating that understanding into action, well, that's where the practical methods come in. The key skill for the Public Relations Council is really to take complex ideas, abstract facts, and simplify and dramatize them.
Turn them into something compelling, something that feels like news.
Exactly. Make it a story, make it visually interesting, make it resonate.
And they have quite a range of tools or mediums to do this, right?
Absolutely. You've got the traditional power of the press, obviously.
Right.
Newspapers, magazines, but then also the growing influence, even back then, of moving pictures, educational films, newsreels shown in cinemas.
Visual storytelling.
Very powerful. Then there's the lecture platform, everything from professional speakers bureaus to just public talks and demonstrations. Direct address.
That's advertising, of course.
Yes, paid advertising. Using purchased space, billboards, posters, sending very controlled, specific messages to targeted groups.
What about less formal channels?
Crucial too, word of mouth. Getting ideas to spread organically, often by influencing key group leaders first, who then carry the message to their circles.
The original influencers, maybe?
In a way, yes. And also, highly targeted direct-by-mail campaigns using carefully compiled lists to reach specific demographics or interest groups.
So a multi-pronged approach, usually. Now, this inevitably brings up the ethics of it all. It sounds incredibly powerful.
It does, and the source confronts this directly. It compares the Public Relations Council to a lawyer in court.
How so?
Both are essentially advocates. They present a partisan representation of one point of view. They're making the best case for their client or their cause.
But that leads to that tricky word, propaganda.
Exactly. The text points out how easily one side labels the other's efforts propaganda while calling their own advocacy education.
It's all about perspective then.
That's the core insight offered. The only difference between propaganda and education, really, is in the point of view. What you believe depends on which side you're on.
That's a really stark way to put it. And it places a huge responsibility on the PR council, doesn't it? If they're that effective at swaying opinion.
Immense responsibility. Because they can shape public thought so effectively, the source argues they effectively act as judge and jury in the court of public opinion.
Meaning they need strong ethical guidelines themselves.
Absolutely. They must maintain an intense scrutiny of his actions and specifically avoid promoting unsocial or otherwise harmful movements or ideas. There's a moral dimension.
So beyond just serving a client, what's seen as the ultimate goal, the higher purpose of this profession?
The source suggests that the higher strata of society, it means the educated, the experts, the intellectuals, have a kind of duty.
A duty to do what?
To inject moral and spiritual motives into public opinion, to elevate the discourse. And in that context, the Public Relations Council's highest usefulness, their most noble role, is ultimately in the creation of a public conscience.
Helping society develop a stronger sense of right and wrong, collectively.
That seems to be the aspiration laid out.
Wow. We have covered a lot of ground. From, those really specific tactics like saving a hotel or selling more bacon, right up to these deep ideas about herd instinct, stereotypes, and the very nature of public opinion.
It really shows how this field, even in its early days, was grappling with incredibly complex forces: psychology, sociology, media.
And working with this vague, little understood, indefinite material called public opinion, as the source merrily puts it.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question to ponder, doesn't it?
Go on.
Well, if we accept these ideas, that we have these innate tendencies towards herd behavior, that stereotypes powerfully shape our perceptions, that we're drawn to conflict and simple narratives, then how much of what we think of as public opinion is genuinely our own independent judgment?
Versus how much is perhaps a result of someone skillfully orchestrating or crystallizing that sentiment for
It's
it.
exactly. How much is organic and how much is constructed? It's something worth thinking about.
Definitely food for thought. We really encourage you, the listener, to keep these insights in mind as you navigate the news, social media, all the information streams around you. Think about the forces, subtle or not so subtle, that might be shaping your own understanding and your own judgment every single day.